He awoke to the plaintive buzz of his phone alarm, a hollow feeling blooming in his chest the moment consciousness took hold. Though he was physically well, something inside him churned with a persistent tension that had become an unwelcome companion. James lay still in bed, listening to his heartbeat thud loudly in his ears. Another Monday. Another day to steel himself for the wave of nerves that always threatened to engulf him. In the soft light of dawn, he reached for the bedside lamp. The mild glow cut through the semi-darkness, illuminating the space he shared with his wife. His eyes landed on the framed photo of her on the nightstand, a smiling face, bright eyes, and an expression brimming with warmth. He felt a twist of guilt in his stomach. She had no idea about the depths of his anxiety, and she had no idea about the secret that calmed it. He'd never been an especially anxious person growing up, or at least that was what everyone told him. He got good grades, did well in sports, had friends. Sure, he worried about typical teenage things, but nothing out of the ordinary. Even in his 20s, as he graduated college and started a career in advertising, he held up fine under stress. It wasn't until he hit his 30s, promotions, bills, a mortgage, daily responsibilities piling up, that the panic attacks began rolling in. At first, it was just a feeling of dread here and there, an inexplicable jitteriness that turned his stomach. Then it escalated. He'd be sitting at his desk minding his own business when a crushing weight settled on his chest, making him gasp for breath. His vision would blur, and everything around him would fade to the background, replaced by the roar of his own thundering pulse. That was usually the point when he'd lock his office door, shake it off, and pretend nothing happened. Though he tried to hide his episodes, he couldn't conceal them forever. Danielle, his wife, was the first to notice. She found him one evening half doubled over on the couch, pale-faced, drenched in sweat, trying desperately to steady his breathing. That was when they both decided he needed help. Therapy followed, and while he found some solace in talking about his fears, progress was slow. Medications were introduced to take the edge off, but they left him feeling hazy. He longed for a way to truly quiet his mind. The peculiar coping mechanism that gave him the most relief revealed itself one afternoon entirely by accident. Danielle had gone to visit her sister for the weekend, leaving behind a half-emptied laundry basket in their bedroom. After a particularly stressful phone call from his boss, James was forced to handle a demanding client, and the pressure had been unbearable. He sat on the bed staring at the crumpled clothes. Among them lay one of his wife's casual summer skirts, a simple garment with a soft floral pattern. He couldn't have explained what compelled him to pick it up. A part of him felt he was doing something strange, maybe even morally wrong, though he couldn't pinpoint why. All he knew was that he was drawn to the fabric's lightness and warmth. He placed the skirt against his arm, feeling the material. A calmness seeped into his shoulders, loosening them in a way he rarely experienced. It was so different from his usual environment, where he dressed in starched shirts and ties, always buttoned up, always presenting a strong, put-together image. The skirt was a world apart from that. It felt like a door to another version of himself, a version free from the expectations and pressures he carried around. Hesitantly, he pulled the skirt on. He braced for a jolt of revulsion or discomfort, something that might confirm his fears that he was doing something unacceptable. Instead, there was a curious feeling of ease that trickled through him, radiating from his chest down to his fingertips. For those few moments, he forgot about looming deadlines, about the phone that might ring at any second with another crisis. The sense of relief he experienced was immediate. His mind, so crowded and frantic with what-ifs and must-dos, momentarily stilled. He stood there, wearing his wife's skirt, staring at his reflection in the tall mirror beside the closet. It wasn't sexual. It wasn't about attraction. It was like stepping out of his own life for a few minutes, a brief holiday from the treadmill of anxiety that had become his norm. Even though a knot of shame lodged itself in his throat, he couldn't deny how his body relaxed. Breathing became easier. The roar of panic that often lurked in the background of his mind quieted. When Danielle returned that Sunday, he was back in his usual clothes, acting as if nothing unusual had transpired. But the effect lingered. The heaviness that so often dogged him had lifted a little. He felt he had discovered something precious, yet terrifying. He didn't want to give it up. Over the next few days, as the demands of his job mounted, his mind kept drifting back to that single moment of stillness, the delicate reassurance of wearing that garment. Even the memory smoothed the tension in his forehead. Another 2 weeks passed before he tried it again. One weekday, Danielle needed to work late at the hospital. She was an administrator there, often juggling multiple shifts. James found himself alone in the house. The moment the door closed behind her, he drifted to the bedroom as if pulled by an invisible thread. He remembered exactly which drawer she kept her favorite summer dresses in. He selected a simple green dress, held it up, and pressed it softly against his face. The silky cloth was cool to the touch, carrying a faint whiff of her perfume. His heart pounded, but not in fear. It was more like anticipation for the calm he hoped to feel. Slipping the dress over his head, he savored how the material slid against his skin. Almost immediately, his mind slowed to a more gentle pace. Sitting down on the bed, he allowed himself to sink deeper into that moment, letting the day's anxieties float away. He closed his eyes, feeling an unaccustomed sensation of lightness in his shoulders and chest. Usually he lived with the constant worry of letting someone down, his boss, his co-workers, or even Danielle. For reasons he couldn't fully articulate, wearing his wife's dress relieved him of that burden. Maybe it was because it felt as if he was stepping into someone else's world, leaving behind his obligations and even his identity. It was a respite he began craving. Yet every time he changed back into his own clothes, shame welled up. Rationally, he couldn't figure out why it felt so taboo. After all, it wasn't harming anyone, and it didn't change how much he cared for his wife or how he saw himself. But he knew society might not understand. What if someone else discovered what he was doing? The embarrassment felt overwhelming. He resolved to keep it a secret, convinced that admitting it to anyone, even Danielle, would be humiliating beyond words. Despite his embarrassment, the pattern continued. He developed a sort of ritual on the evenings Danielle worked late. He'd watch the clock, waiting until he was sure she wouldn't come home early, then he'd slip into one of her skirts or dresses. After half an hour, or sometimes an hour, he'd fold everything neatly and place it exactly where he'd found it so that she would never suspect a thing. Occasionally, the guilt pressed so heavily on him that he vowed to stop. But when his next anxiety spiral hit, the memory of how calm he felt was too powerful to resist. Even so, part of him wondered whether it was wise or even healthy to lean on this secret practice. He tried to bring it up indirectly during therapy sessions. His therapist, Dr. Kamal, was a compassionate man in his 50s, good at sensing when James was holding back. One day, Dr. Kamal said, "You've mentioned that there's something you do at home that helps you relax. Do you want to talk about it?" James's pulse quickened, and he found himself gripping the arms of the chair. "I just have a routine," he said vaguely. "I don't want to get into details. I'm worried I'll be judged." Dr. Kamal's expression was neutral, inviting. "This is a safe space," he replied. "I'm not here to judge. I'm here to understand and help." James swallowed and shifted in his seat. "It's something unusual, and I'm not sure you'd understand." "Try me," Dr. Kamal said gently, but James couldn't muster the words. Admitting it to a professional, even in a confidential environment, seemed impossible. He feared seeing pity or shock flash across Dr. Kamal's face, so he shook his head. "I'm just not ready," he mumbled. The therapist nodded understandingly, but James could feel the tension simmering in the air. Outside of therapy, the daily pressures at his advertising firm intensified. A major campaign for a high-profile client was falling behind schedule, and James, as one of the account managers, was caught in the middle of endless phone calls, frantic emails, and late-night strategy sessions. Even after taking medication, he found himself stepping outside to catch his breath in the hallway, sometimes dabbing cold water on his face in the restroom in the hope of staving off another anxiety attack. Danielle noticed something was amiss, but every time she asked, "Are you doing okay?" He forced a smile, nodding in the hollow way he'd perfected. He could feel the lie of omission weighing heavily on him. There were evenings when Danielle climbed into bed next to him, concern etched into her features. Sometimes she'd touch his arm and say, "I know you're not telling me something. You haven't been the same lately. I'm worried." Though her tone was loving, James's throat would close up every time. How could he explain that the only thing that brought him relief was wearing her dresses in secret? His conflicted feelings intensified around the time of their anniversary. They'd planned a small gathering, just a few close friends, for a weekend barbecue. By then, James's nerves were wound too tight, threatening to snap at any moment. That morning he woke in a sweat, his chest tight, his thoughts racing. The errands for the party, the possibility of disappointing his wife if something went wrong, the knowledge that colleagues and friends might see through his carefully constructed calm, all of it pressed down on him until he felt he could barely breathe. With Danielle in the shower, he crept into her closet, found one of her flowing skirts, and slid into it. The wave of comfort was immediate, as though he'd stepped out from under a downpour into a cozy living room. He felt his fists unclench and his shoulders drop. But as he stood in front of the mirror, he heard the water shut off in the bathroom. In a panic, he tore the skirt off, stuffing it back into its place. His heart hammered like he'd been caught committing a crime. He scrambled to his feet just as Danielle walked in, hair damp and wrapped in a towel. She gave him a curious look. "You okay? You're breathing really fast." He shot her what he hoped was a reassuring smile. "Just woke up on the anxious side," he said, which was technically true. He busied himself by making the bed, hoping she wouldn't come closer and notice the faint tremor in his hands. That barbecue was a success by most accounts. Their small group of friends filled the backyard with laughter. The grill sizzled, neighbors dropped by to say hello, and the atmosphere was cheerful. James tried to be a good host, but his mind buzzed with tension, as though reminding him that beneath his outwardly normal appearance lay a hidden truth he could never share. Whenever Danielle touched his arm and looked into his eyes with quiet concern, he forced another bright laugh, deflecting the sincerity of her questions. Eventually, the stress came to a head late one Thursday night. He was working on a tight deadline, putting in hours at the office. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the place was mostly empty. Coffee cups piled next to his keyboard. His eyes stung from staring at spreadsheets and creative briefs. He knew he had to finalize the budget by morning, but his thoughts raced too fast to form a coherent plan. His heart thumped rapidly, sweat forming on his brow. It was one of those moments when he realized a panic attack was inbound, creeping stealthily and ready to strike. He decided to leave early, sure that he'd accomplish little in that state. Driving home, he realized Danielle would be asleep, or at least getting ready for bed. He arrived to a darkened house, the living room lamp throwing weak shadows across the floor. He tiptoed inside, his limbs heavy with exhaustion and dread. He found a note on the kitchen counter from Danielle. "Had to stay a bit late for a new hires orientation. We'll be back by midnight. Love you." James glanced at the time. It was just after 11. He felt an odd mixture of relief and shame. Relief that the house was empty, shame that the main reason he wanted it empty was so he could slip into something that wasn't his. He tried not to overthink it. He trudged into the bedroom, flung his jacket over a chair, and opened her dresser drawer. His hand paused on a pale blue skirt he particularly liked because it was airy and light. He slipped it on, stepping in front of the full-length mirror. He watched himself for a moment, letting the tension in his neck dissolve. He sat on the edge of the bed, inhaling and exhaling slowly, attempting to savor that fleeting calm. There was no phone ringing, no urgent demands from anyone. It was just him in the dim lighting, free from the burden he felt every day. The gentle fabric draped over his legs reminded him that there existed a place in which his stress ebbed. It was at that moment that the front door opened. Panic flashed in his eyes as he scrambled to his feet. He heard Danielle's keys jangle, followed by her voice calling out, "James, you awake?" He froze, not sure what to do. In that split second, he yanked the skirt up and fumbled to yank it off, but the zipper caught on the hem, tangling around his waist. A surge of dread surged through him. He'd never felt so exposed in his life. In a matter of seconds, Danielle stood in the bedroom doorway. She froze as her gaze landed on the half-removed skirt around his hips. Time seemed to stand still. Her face was a portrait of confusion and shock. He tried to speak, but the words died in his throat. He managed to quickly shove the skirt off, but the damage was done. She stood there, wide-eyed, her mouth open as though searching for something to say. "James?" she said, her voice quivering. What is this?" He swallowed hard, tears burning behind his eyes. He wanted to vanish, to sink through the floor. The moment he had dreaded for so long was unfolding in real time. He couldn't even form a coherent sentence. I can explain," he stammered, though he had no idea how. Danielle took a shaky breath and stepped inside the room, quietly closing the door behind her, as if to keep the rest of the world away. Her expression softened slightly, overshadowed by concern. "Are you hurt? Is something wrong?" she asked, looking utterly perplexed but also protective. James finally pulled the crumpled skirt free and set it aside on the bed. He could hear his own ragged breathing in the hush of the room. "I'm sorry," he said, voice trembling. "I didn't mean for you to find out this way." She blinked, her eyes drifting from the skirt to his face. "Is this something that you've been doing for a while?" He hesitated, then gave a faint nod. I don't know why. It started months ago. It helps my anxiety. I can't explain it in a logical way, but wearing your clothes calms me down." Danielle looked stunned, and for a moment, James worried she might run out of the room. Instead, she sank down on the edge of the bed, placing a hand on her brow. He remained standing, feeling a storm of fear, guilt, and profound relief. At least the secret was out, however chaotic the reveal might be. Her voice quivered. "I don't understand. Why would you do that?" He moved closer, though he kept a respectful distance. "I'm still trying to figure it out myself," he admitted. "I just discovered by accident that it helps the pressure in my head go away. It's not..." He paused, searching for the right words. "It's not a fetish or anything. It's purely something that soothes me. I know it probably sounds crazy." She looked up, meeting his eyes. There was a flicker of hurt there, not necessarily at what he was doing, but at the realization he hadn't trusted her enough to tell her. "Does it matter if it sounds crazy?" she asked softly. "What really hurts is that you felt you couldn't come to me, that you had to hide this." A single tear slipped down his cheek. It felt mortifying, but he couldn't hold it back. He lowered his head. "I was ashamed," he whispered. "I kept thinking that if I told you, you'd see me differently. I'm supposed to be this strong husband, the one who takes care of you, and I'm already failing because of the anxiety. I was scared you'd judge me." Danielle let out a shaky breath, and her shoulders sagged as though a weight pressed down on them. After a prolonged moment, she patted the bed beside her, indicating he should sit. He joined her, uncertain of what else to do. When he finally met her gaze, he saw a mixture of concern, confusion, and something akin to compassion. "You're not failing me," she said, her voice scarcely above a whisper. "But I wish you'd talk to me. All those nights I asked if something was wrong, you'd say you were just stressed. I didn't think it went this far. I had no idea." James stared down at his hands. His thoughts were spinning in a million directions, each tangling into the next. "I'm sorry," he repeated. "I really am." She opened her mouth as if to say more, but then closed it. Instead, she reached out and touched his hand gently. He felt a jolt, not of anxiety, but of raw vulnerability. He looked up, uncertain if what he saw in her eyes was acceptance or just shock. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The unspoken tension in the air was palpable, but her expression shifted, and she seemed to gather her composure. "Let's at least try to talk this through," she murmured. "I feel like we both need to understand what's happening." He nodded, grateful she hadn't instantly demanded a divorce or stormed out. Still, the mere thought of discussing the details mortified him. He guessed that no matter what, they'd crossed a line that would change their relationship forever. Over the next hour, they attempted a halting conversation, one punctuated by lingering silences. He explained how it began, the panic attacks, and the strange sense of calm he found. He admitted he'd tried to talk about it in therapy but got too scared. He confessed how deeply ashamed he felt, yet how desperately he needed that relief. Danielle listened, asking a handful of clarifying questions. Her brow was furrowed, not with anger but with concern, and a desire to grasp how he was feeling. She eventually closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "I never realized how bad your anxiety had become," she said, her voice tinged with regret. "I saw you were stressed, but I had no idea it reached this level. I feel guilty for not pushing harder, for not insisting you open up to me." James shook his head. "It's not your fault. I've always been scared of showing weakness." A pained smile touched her lips. "Being anxious isn't a weakness," she said. "If anything, hiding it away all this time must have weighed on you like an anchor." He exhaled, a mix of relief and uncertainty swirling in his chest. The conversation was still deeply uncomfortable, but at least they were having it. He felt an odd flicker of gratitude that she was even willing to sit there and talk. Deep down, he sensed the road ahead would be complicated, but in that moment, he wanted to cling to the solace that she hadn't run away. They went to bed that night exhausted and emotionally drained. Danielle lay awake next to him, her breathing slightly off rhythm, as if she too couldn't find rest. James stared at the ceiling, replaying the entire encounter in his head. Even though it was excruciating to have been discovered in such a way, he also felt a strange sense of release, like stepping off a tightrope that he'd been precariously balancing on for months, maybe years. He knew the next day would bring new challenges, more conversations, more explanations, but the worst of the hiding was done. The next morning he found her in the kitchen, pajamas rumpled, hair undone, sipping coffee by the sink. He approached quietly. She turned when she saw him, and a shy smile crossed her lips. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey," he replied, standing awkwardly by the doorway. She set down her mug, her expression thoughtful. "I'm not gonna lie," she began gently. "It's a lot to take in, but I'm here. I just need to figure out how we move forward." James studied her face, noting the weariness under her eyes. He stepped closer, bracing himself for any sign of revulsion or anger, Seeing none, he felt a sliver of hope. "I never wanted to hide things from you," he said. "I just didn't know how to say it." She nodded. "I believe you. It's just, we need to talk about boundaries, about whether this is something that's going to keep happening, and how comfortable we are discussing it." She paused, seeming to measure her next words. "I'm concerned, but I'm not disgusted." A rush of tension left him, though he still felt shaky. "I understand, and if it makes you uncomfortable, I can stop, if that's what you need." Her lips parted, and for a second she seemed unsure how to respond. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "This is new to me, and I can't say I fully get it. But if it helps you in a way that nothing else has, I'm not going to forbid you from doing it. I just want us to be able to talk openly so I'm not left in the dark. I don't want you feeling alone, and I don't want you to close yourself off out of shame." He felt tears sting at the corners of his eyes again. The magnitude of her understanding was staggering. Danielle had always been compassionate, but he'd convinced himself that discovering his habit would break her trust irreparably. There were layers to unravel, and he couldn't guess what the next few days or weeks might look like. But in that moment, her concern provided a glimpse of light. They continued their quiet conversation as the aroma of coffee drifted around them. James told her in more detail about his anxiety, about how the demands of work and the pressure to be the perfect husband had left him feeling like a balloon about to burst. He admitted he struggled to see himself as strong or stable when his mind tormented him with doubt and panic. Danielle listened, interjecting with gentle observations, letting him know that she still cared deeply about him, that she still saw him as the man she married. He felt raw, yet in a rare way, also relieved. The long night of feeling like he might be discovered at any moment was over. Now came the challenge of navigating this new terrain in daylight, with honesty. He knew it wouldn't be easy. They were bound to have uncomfortable discussions. He was certain she would have questions about what it meant for their relationship and for his sense of self. But the fact she was even willing to try gave him hope that they would find some path forward. That weekend, at Danielle's urging, he scheduled an extra therapy session with Dr. Kamal. This time, James managed to summon the courage to share the specifics of his coping mechanism. His throat felt tight and his palms sweaty as he laid it out, waiting for signs of shock or disapproval on Dr. Kamal's face. But the therapist remained calm, gently asking questions to unpack the meaning of it, the sense of relief it provided. James confessed that it wasn't about attraction or identity. He simply found it soothing. Dr. Kamal nodded, suggesting that perhaps the clothes symbolized a break from his daily identity and the burdens tied to it. From there, James's therapy sessions took a new direction. Instead of speaking in cryptic hints, he spoke openly about his shame and fear. That openness, while daunting, gave him a better sense of how to handle his stress. Dr. Kamal encouraged him to talk about it at home, to bring Danielle into the conversation. That was an intimidating prospect, but after their initial awkward confrontation, James was determined not to hide anymore. At first, the conversation with Danielle felt clumsy. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, they sat together in the living room, her legs tucked beneath her on the couch, him perched on the edge of the cushions, posture rigid as though bracing for a blow. She listened as he recounted his therapy session, nodding silently, arms wrapped around a throw pillow. It still unnerved him to see her in the clothes he sometimes wore in secret, but he also realized how strange it must be for her. She asked if it was something he hoped to keep doing, especially now that the secret was out. "I want to try other methods to reduce my anxiety," he said carefully. "But yes, it does help me. I don't expect you to be involved if it makes you uncomfortable. I just want you to know I'm working on the bigger issues too." She sighed softly, glancing at the wall. "I appreciate your honesty. I'll admit, When I first walked in on you, my mind went in circles. I wondered if you were attracted to men or if you were hiding something else. But if this is purely about calming your mind, I'm trying to be open to that. I'm still figuring out how I feel about it. Part of me wants to be supportive, but it also feels strange. Does that make sense?" He nodded vigorously. "Yeah, I totally get it," he said. "Nothing about this is normal for me either. I'm still uncertain how to even label it, and I definitely don't want you to feel pressured to be okay with it instantly." She reached for his hand, giving it a small squeeze. "Thank you for saying that. We'll take it day by day." And so they did. In the following weeks, James found their relationship shifting. They spoke more openly than they had in a long while, not just about the cross-dressing, but also about his panic attacks, the subtle triggers that set him off, and the heavy weight he felt to fulfill everyone's expectations. He began leaning more on therapy techniques like breathing exercises and journaling. Some nights, if he felt overwhelmed, he'd slip away to the bedroom to wear a skirt for a short while. He never flaunted it in front of Danielle, but he stopped scrambling to hide the evidence quite so frantically. Danielle admitted it was still jarring for her at times, especially if she walked into the bedroom unexpectedly and saw him dressed that way. Yet she didn't pull away from him or lash out. More often, they'd exchange a few tense looks, followed by a careful conversation about how each of them felt. The taboo surrounding it began to lessen bit by bit. Occasionally, Danielle would ask him questions, things that ranged from the practical, "Did you wash that skirt before you put it back?" to the deeply personal, "Does wearing my favorite dress help more than wearing my casual shirts?" James would blush, uncertain how to answer, but he'd do his best to be honest. Work remained stressful, but James started to handle it better. He became more direct in telling his colleagues he needed time off when the workload became extreme. He pressed for more balanced task distribution among the team. At home, Danielle encouraged him to maintain the coping mechanisms that made him feel safer, and he, in turn, committed to not letting it take over every aspect of his life. He wanted to ensure it stayed a small but significant tool among many to manage his panic. Life doesn't change overnight, though. Some days were easier. Others were weighed down by self-consciousness and tension. One Sunday morning, James emerged from the bedroom wearing a plain black t-shirt and jeans. Danielle was in the kitchen flipping pancakes. She turned when she heard him and asked gently, "You doing all right?" He forced a wry smile. "You mean after last night?" "Yeah, I'm okay." They both recalled how he'd broken down crying after an unexpected work call informed him that a deal he'd been working on for months had fallen through at the last minute. Frustrated and drowning in his own self-reproach, he had retreated to the bedroom in tears. Danielle found him a while later, sitting on the edge of the bed wearing one of her dresses, shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. She'd sat next to him, placed a hand on his back, and let him cry. They hadn't spoken until he calmed enough to breathe normally again. Then she'd kissed his cheek and whispered that they'd figure it out together. This morning, she gave him a gentle nod. "Good," she said, returning to the stove. "Breakfast will be ready soon." He approached her from behind, slid his arms around her waist, and rested his cheek against the back of her shoulder. The pancake batter hissed on the griddle, filling the kitchen with a pleasant warmth. "Thank you," he murmured into her hair, his voice barely audible over the sizzle. She stilled for a moment, turning off the burner before twisting around to face him. Her gaze held a flicker of lingering uncertainty, but also an undeniable affection. "We're in this together, James." He pulled her closer, savoring the intimacy of the moment. Her acceptance, however complicated, made him feel less alone. They continued with their day, ran errands, tidied up the living room, spent time discussing mundane tasks, bound by a deeper honesty than they'd had before. Occasionally, Danielle would ask if he wanted her to help him pick out what to wear when he got anxious. The first time she did, he hesitated, unsure if involving her more directly would be a relief, or if it would heighten his embarrassment. Ultimately, he admitted that having her choose might feel too vulnerable at the time. She nodded, respecting his boundary. There was no manual on how to handle a situation like this, so they navigated it with gradual baby steps. As the months unfolded, James found the cross-dressing episodes gradually became less frequent. He discovered it still provided a unique calm, but he also built healthier coping techniques in therapy. Sometimes, all he needed was a quiet moment in a closed room, or an extra long run on the treadmill, or a gentle conversation with Danielle to hold back the tide of panic. While he didn't want to eradicate the practice entirely, it had proven its worth as a balm. He realized it was only one thread in the tapestry of his healing. Danielle, for her part, still had some emotional turbulence. She confided in him that she worried about what it all meant for their future, or if other secrets might be lurking. They did their best to keep talking. Some nights, the discussions ended in frustration, each of them feeling misunderstood. But they pressed on, determined not to let silence and secrecy consume them again. Bit by bit, their marriage found a new equilibrium, one more honest than before. They learned that genuine closeness often emerges from shared vulnerability. It wasn't always easy. There were moments James felt the old reflex to hide, especially if he felt her gaze linger on him in puzzlement. He battled the urge to bury his feelings in shame, but he forced himself to speak, to let the conversation happen, even if it was awkward or uncomfortable. One evening, after a long day at work, James collapsed onto the couch, exhaling heavily. Danielle joined him, curling her legs beneath her. The living room lamp bathed them in a soft glow. She rested her head against his shoulder, and for a moment, they said nothing. Then she murmured, "I've been thinking about how much has changed since the night I found you in our bedroom." His stomach clenched at the memory, but he nodded. "Yeah, a lot has changed," he agreed softly. She fiddled with a loose thread on the couch cushion. "I think—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I think we communicate more openly now, ironically enough. It's like we had to drag that secret into the light so we could finally be honest about everything else." He brushed a hand over her hair. He recognized the courage it took for her to voice that thought. He pressed his lips to the top of her head. "I'm just grateful you didn't leave," he whispered. "I was so sure you'd never look at me the same way again." She wrapped her arms around his waist. "It hasn't been easy," she admitted. "But I still see you, James. You're the man I love. You're just more complicated than I realized." Her lips curved into a small, tentative grin. He felt his breath hitch, and a tiny laugh escaped him, a laugh laced with gratitude and lingering nerves. "I guess we all have hidden corners," he said. They sank into a comfortable silence, letting the weight of those words rest gently between them. In the distance, the hum of the refrigerator and the faint screech of a passing car on the street reminded them that life continued on, minute by minute, outside their small circle. But for once, James felt present in the moment, not lost in the swirl of anxiety about tomorrow or the regrets of yesterday. Later that night, he found himself in bed, wide awake, thoughts spinning with what the future might hold. Danielle slept softly beside him, her breathing even, a calm presence that soothed him in the darkness. He considered how far they'd come since the day he first slipped into that floral skirt out of sheer desperation. Life had shifted, and so had he. Though he had no grand solution for his anxiety, no magic bullet that would banish it forever, he had discovered ways to manage, as well as a trust in Danielle that he'd once feared would evaporate upon the slightest revelation of his secret. He brushed a hand over her shoulder, marveling at the gentle rise and fall of her breath. He recalled all the nights she'd asked if he was all right, all the mornings she'd held him when the panic threatened to break him. Even though their marriage had encountered an odd stumbling block, she remained at his side, her compassion outshining any confusion or discomfort she felt. It was something he knew he could never take for granted. Time marched forward. Their schedules returned to an almost ordinary routine, though now and then Danielle caught him eyeing a dress or skirt in the closet with a forlorn glance if his anxiety flared. Sometimes he'd give in, but other times he'd try another method: reading, meditating, or stepping outside for fresh air. The habit didn't vanish, but it blended into the tapestry of his life, becoming merely one strand rather than the defining thread. And as much as he still carried guilt about the day she found him, he also realized that moment had cracked open a conversation they might never have had otherwise. It allowed them to navigate the fault lines in their marriage, to discover that their love could endure unexpected truths. He no longer needed to hide a part of himself in shame. That didn't mean everything became effortless or easy. There were still days he wrestled with embarrassment or felt Danielle's guarded curiosity. Yet her ongoing reassurance steadied him. "We'll handle this together." On a warm Friday night, months later, they decided to sit out on the back porch. The air smelled of freshly cut grass, and the last hint of sunset glowed on the horizon. Danielle handed him a glass of iced tea, then eased down on the wooden bench beside him. The cushions squeaked lightly under their weight. They watched the sky turn a deeper blue, speckled with the first stars. "You seem calmer," she remarked, her voice quiet in the hush of dusk. James let a small, genuine smile curve his lips. "I have my moments," he said. "But yeah, overall, I think I'm managing better." He paused, swirling the tea in his glass. "Thank you for being patient with me, for letting me figure this out." She settled a hand on his knee. "We're figuring it out together," she replied, though she left unspoken the fact that it was still a work in progress. He caught the significance of her tone, the unspoken recognition that they were partners in this strange odyssey. As a mild breeze rustled through the trees, James recalled the nights he'd huddled in the bedroom, heart pounding, terrified that someone, anyone, would learn about his secret. Now, though the fear of judgment wasn't entirely gone, he knew the woman beside him was not turning her back on him. It was a tenuous relief, a fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to face his inner struggles alone. They lingered out there until the sky turned fully dark and the cicadas began their soft chatter. Finally, Danielle stood, taking his empty glass, and reached for his hand. "Let's go in. It's getting chilly." He rose, fingers intertwined with hers. As he looked into her eyes, he saw concern and love, curiosity and acceptance, all woven together into a complex but genuine devotion. For a moment, he imagined the path ahead. There would be work stress, more therapy sessions, evenings when the old panic would surface. But he knew he could handle it, bit by bit, with her by his side. And if on some nights he needed a quiet moment wearing clothes that weren't his own, maybe that was just one of many ways to soothe the ever-restless tide within him. He wouldn't have to hide it anymore, and that itself was a significant weight lifted. They went inside, turning off lights and locking doors. He placed an arm around her shoulders as they walked through the hallway, both of them ready for bed, ready to face whatever the next day might bring. James felt a deep-seated gratitude, recognizing that raw honesty had been frightening, but it was necessary for him to break free from the silent fear that once consumed him. With Danielle's unspoken blessing and a determination to keep moving forward, he let himself breathe more fully than he had in a very long time. Though the future remained uncertain, the path no longer felt so lonely, and that small yet important comfort guided him onward, one step at a time, heart brimming with hope and mind a little quieter than before.
Did you like the story? Hit that like button and tell me what you thought in the comments. Do you want to hear more stories? Subscribe and hit the bell. For exclusive content and early access, check out our Patreon. You can find the link in the description, or you can watch any of the videos shown on my right. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.